This conference will now be recorded.
Is being recorded and it will be publicly available. Please go ahead and just double check that your line is muted. We will have time for questions at the end of Erica's presentation. So if you feel you might forget your question or you want to, something occurs to you during her presentation, please feel free to put it in the chat box and we'll go through them later on the call. And since there are so many of you, it looks like most of you do have your videos off, which is what we would recommend just to help us preserve bandwidth. But feel free to, if you want to ask a question and you want to turn your video on, that's fine too. So I think that's it. I'll turn it over to you, Erica, to get started, and just let me know when you'd like me to advance the slides.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Amy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to my presentation on the Value Added Producer Grant. My name is Erica Molmer, and I am a Business and Cooperative Program Specialist with USDA Rural Development, located in our Portland, Oregon office. Next slide, please. So before we get started on the Value Added Producer Grant, I wanted to first talk to you a little bit about rural development, or RD. RD is an agency. RD is an agency housed under the U.S. Department of Agriculture, along with our sister agencies, the Farm Service Agency, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and Risk Management Agency, just to name a few. The mission of rural development is to assist rural communities in creating prosperity so they are self-sustaining and economically thriving through investments that create ladders of opportunity, build regional resilience, and support the growth of emerging markets. We have more than 40 loan, grant, and technical assistance programs to support economic development in rural communities. At the national level, programs and services are delivered through 3 agencies: Rural Business and Cooperative Service, Rural Housing Service, and the Rural Utility Service. The VAPG is administered by the Rural Business and Cooperative Service. All right, so now I will transition into talking about the Value Added Producer Grant. Next slide, please. The Value Added Producer Grant program helps agricultural producers enter into value-added activities related to the planning, processing, and marketing of new products. The goals of this program are to generate new products, create and expand marketing opportunities, and increase producer income. Grants are awarded through a national competition. Each fiscal year, applications are requested through a notice in the Federal Register and through an announcement posted on grants.gov. Next slide, please. So this fiscal year, the VAP deadline to apply online is April 29th, 2021. The deadline for paper applications is May 4th of 2021. If you are considering applying for this grant, I strongly encourage you to reach out to myself before submitting your application to ensure that you are submitting the most competitive application possible. Next slide, please. So, as you've probably heard, there have been some changes related to COVID-19 funding bill that was passed in December. So an amended VAPG notice was published in the Federal Register on March 5th of 2021. The amended notice includes details from the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which was passed in December of 2020. The Consolidated Appropriations Act provides the VAPG an additional $35 million nationally in COVID-19 relief funding. Accordingly, a total of $76 million in program funding is available, which is a record. The agency is extending the application deadline increasing availability of total funding for the program, allowing for application submission through email, eliminating the awarding of points for the level of commitment category specified in Section 1C of the application toolkit, and allowing for a reduced cost share match of 10% of the grant amount for the $35 million in COVID relief funding. All applicants will automatically be entered in to compete for the COVID-19 funding pot. The COVID-19 funds will be awarded to those who score the highest first. Once those funds are all used up, the remaining applications will compete for the regular pot of VAPG funds with the one-to-one match requirement. The anticipated award announcement date remains September 30th of 2021. Next slide, please. So now we're going to get into who is eligible to apply for this grant. Next slide. Agricultural producers such as independent producers, agricultural producer groups, farmer or rancher cooperatives, and majority-controlled producer-based business ventures are all eligible applicant types. You may receive priority points if you are a beginning farmer or rancher, a socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher, a small or medium-sized farm or ranch structured as a family farm, and a farmer or rancher cooperative, or if you are posing as a mid-tier value chain. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, and I'm wondering if everyone could mute their phones, please. Thank you. All right, what is a value-added product? Next slide. All right, so there are 5 categories a qualifying value-added product can fall under. The product only needs to qualify under one of these categories, but may qualify for more than one. Change in physical state, produced in a manner that enhances the value, product segregation, or farm or ranch-based renewable energy, or a locally produced agricultural food product. Next slide, please. All right, so change in physical state just means an irreversible processing activity that alters the raw agricultural commodity and enhances its value, and is something other than a post-harvest process that primarily acts to preserve the commodity for a later sale. So got some examples on the screen of milk into cheese, grapes into wine, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So the second category is produced in a manner that enhances the value. The value-added product results from the use of a recognizably coherent set of agricultural production practices in the growing of the raw agricultural commodity, such that a differentiated market identity is created. So this is pretty straightforward. It's pretty much anything that's organic or free range or grass-fed. Those are some examples. Next slide, please. All right, third, we have product segregation. This is a value-added product that results from the physically separating the agricultural commodity from other varieties of the same commodity. So GMO corn versus non-GMO corn, and again, organic versus non-organic can also qualify as this product segregation category. Slide, please. So the fourth criteria for a value-added methodology is probably the least, I guess, used of the 5, which is farm or ranch-based renewable energy. This is an agricultural commodity that is used to generate renewable energy on a farm or ranch owned or leased by the independent producer applicant that produces the agricultural commodity. And there are some examples on the screen of dairy manure into methane that can be then put into an anaerobic digester to create electricity, corn into biodiesel. What's not eligible for this category is any on-farm generation of energy from natural resources like wind, solar, geothermal, or hydro. We actually have a separate program that is offered through USDA Rural Development for energy projects such as these. So if you want to know more about those, feel free to ask me after the presentation. Next slide, please. And the final category for what is a value-added product is locally produced agricultural food product. So this is any agricultural food product that is raised, produced, and distributed within 400 miles of the product's origin or within the state in which the product is produced. And you'll have to show in your application how you plan to only sell at the local scale rather than regional. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to get into how the funds can be used. Next slide. All right, so first we have working capital expenses, which may be used to pay eligible project expenses related to the processing and or marketing of the value-added product. Some examples include processing costs, such as labor, utilities, packaging, labeling, and ingredients. You can also purchase additional raw commodity inventory from a third party up to 50% of the total amount required for the project. So if you have, let's say, 1 or 2 head of cattle and you would like to purchase additional head of cattle to use for your project, you can purchase that from a third party, and it can't be a conflict of interest. Then we have marketing and advertising expenses, which is pretty broad. It can be anywhere between, like, paper advertising, online advertising. You could pay somebody to set up a marketing campaign for the product. The possibilities are pretty broad for marketing. And this grant is a maximum of $250,000. Next slide, please. Next, we have planning activities. So planning activity expenses may be used to pay a qualified third-party consultant for the development of a feasibility study, marketing, and or business plan related to the processing and marketing of the value-added product. And this grant is a maximum of $75,000. Next slide. I want to go over some ineligible uses of funds because there are some big ones that I get asked lots of questions on. Some activities that are ineligible for both the planning and working capital expenses include purchase of land, buildings, or equipment, preparation of the grant application itself, research and development, architectural or engineering design work, or expenses for the production, harvesting, or delivery to a processing facility of the value-added product. I get some questions from people about research and development because the planning grant is research into the product to determine its feasibility. That's okay, you can do that. You just can't do research and development that it has nothing to do with the success or failure of the value-added product. And then expenses for production and harvesting and or delivery to a processing facility, anything that falls outside of the value-added activities. So harvesting the crop before you do any value-added activity to it, that is ineligible because it falls out of the timeline of the project. So those are just a few ineligible use of fund examples. Next slide, please. Okay, so I want to go over the matching fund requirement. In a traditional year, the match requirement would be 1-to-1. So 50% of the total project cost would have to either be in the form of cash or in kind. Cash is what you think it is. It's cash in the bank. In kind can be one of two things. It can be labor or raw commodity. So your in-kind labor, it can be owner labor, or it can be employee labor used as donation towards the project, or in-kind raw commodity, which is the value of your raw commodity. In this cycle, if you are awarded the COVID-19 funding pot, you only need to provide 10% of the grant amount towards your in-kind. And it doesn't matter if it's cash or in-kind. There won't be any points awarded regardless. So if you have a grant that's $250,000, your match requirement would only be $25,000, and that can be in either cash or in kind. Next slide, please. All right, so how do I get started? That's the big question. Next slide. So grants are not awarded to individuals who are not associated with an organization or business. So the requirement for all applicants, including sole proprietors, is that you have a DUNS number. So I strongly recommend one of the first things you do is request your DUNS number, which can be done online or via phone. Next slide, please. The other very important first step is to register with SAM. So registering for SAM can take some more time than registering for your DUNS number. However, if you provide your registration evidence that you've started the process by the application deadline, should be no problem. You only need to have your SAM registration in place before we can obligate the funds, which will be in September, around September sometime. So online registration of SAM is located at the hyperlink, and it is free. So if you ever get anyone trying to charge you for a SAM registration, it's fraud. It's a faulty website. All right, next slide, please. So here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time for specifically the application. The application, we have two different application toolkits. We have one for the working capital grant and one for the planning grant, and I can help you determine which one you need. But feel free to call me or email me at either of those links down there to get some information. Next slide. Here is the USDA's full equal employment opportunity statement. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so now I am available for any questions that have come in the chat, or if you want to unmute your phones and ask a question, feel free.
Thanks, Erica. We do have one question that's been submitted so far, and that is about whether an applicant whether an applicant can apply for more than one grant, or the question is, can we get more than one grant? But I think the question is really about, can they apply for different tracks, or can they receive grant funds from different areas?
Yes, I can answer that question.
Just a reminder, everyone, to please mute your lines if you are just listening in and don't have a question.
Great, yes. So you can apply for one grant per solicitation, and you cannot apply year after year for the same project. So if you have a working capital grant one year, you can apply for an additional working capital grant in a subsequent year. However, it needs to be significantly different in terms of product and market.
Is that true whether you get a grant? Like if you apply and don't get it, can you apply the next year with the same grant?
So you can only get one at a time.
Yes, yes, you can. If you are not awarded a grant for 2020, for example, you can reapply the next year with the same scope.
It didn't say. You can type that in.
Okay, we have another question from Chelsea. And this question says, for a sole proprietorship, Black-owned apiary, and wanting to increase honey production. Okay, so she's a sole proprietor for a Black-owned apiary, and she wants to increase her honey production. Could the cost of additional hives and bees be applicable for the grant program?
That'd be like a cow.
Hold on one second. I'm so sorry. So hold on. I'm so sorry. One second.
Her dog keeps barking.
Type it.
What? That her dog keeps barking?
No, type and let's see how much money is available.
So additional bees,
Yeah.
I think, would be eligible. Additional hives also would be eligible under supplies. It's not a piece of equipment because it's not a piece of equipment. So yes, additional bees, yes, and then additional hives would count as supplies.
Erica, I have a question for you. I have a cow-calf operation, and if we want to go in to do more locker beef, would getting a walk-in freezer to store the meat be under this grant?
Okay, then how do we start the process?
No, you cannot purchase a walk-in freezer because that's considered equipment.
Oh, okay.
No, it's not equipment. That'd be
Refrigerator?
Erica, I don't know if there's other questions, but would you mind giving a few examples of ways the grant has been used? It would help me wrap my head around what's appropriate use of the funds.
Just in general, some examples of what it's been used for. Grapes into wine, beef into cuts of beef, packaged and sold as is. We've done kombucha, ciders, honey.
Considered ag?
I think those are a couple examples of what we've done in the past.
So I own a blueberry farm, so I'm just trying, I kind of, it's similar to I guess I have been thinking about equipment that I would need to do some of things that I'd like to do for value added, but would also just, if you were moving from conventional to organic, would it cover the cost of like
Just a reminder, that it's not muted. Everyone
If you
that's
are
not
caller
muted, if you
7, you
could,
are not muted and you're making a lot of noise for the rest of us.
I'm going to mute
Amy,
that.
do you have? Okay,
I'm
yeah,
going
I
to
was
mute.
gonna say.
Yeah, let me see if I can
I
just
was going to
mute
say
all
this.
the lines.
Okay, hey everyone. So for blueberries, if they are,
Just one moment, Erica. Let's just go ahead and I'm going to mute all the lines, so you won't probably be able to unmute yourself. I know there's some of you that have actually called in, so I can see who you are and I will unmute you individually, but we're getting so much feedback. I think it's difficult for everyone to follow the question and answers. So why don't we go ahead and use the chat box if you can, but I do know who the callers are on here and I will unmute your lines individually when there's an opportunity for another question. So Erica, do you want to go ahead and answer that woman's question about
yes, about the blueberries and how it can be used? Yeah, I think so. If the blueberries are organic, then they would qualify as is. They can qualify under the produced in a manner that enhances the value. So you could sell your blueberries as is if they are organic. If not, you can sell a value-added product for blueberries, maybe, I don't know, maybe getting pressed into juice or jam or something along the lines of that. It has to go through a value-added process activity that was listed in the PowerPoint, which is change in physical state, produced in a manner that enhances the value, or product segregation or locally produced.
Yeah, I think, I mean, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So I have ideas on what it means to do value added. Like I've jam and like chocolates and what have you, but I'm not quite clear on what kind of costs the grant covers in order to make that happen. So and I don't know. Good question. Like a lot of what I'm thinking, like blueberry donuts to sell during you pick time and what have you, that wouldn't cover any of those machine costs. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around what costs it does cover.
Yeah, okay. So, for example, it can cover the washing, it can cover the packaging of the blueberries, and in the case of the blueberry donuts, it can pay for the labor involved in making the donuts. It can pay for the labor involved in selling the donuts at a farm store. It can also pay for the advertising of the donuts or the blueberries. So online advertising, in-store advertising, stuff like that.
Okay. Or like if you were to take frozen berries to a market or something, it would cover the labor that I could pay someone to go to the market.
Yes, and it can also pay for market supplies. So supplies is a lot different than equipment because equipment would be like a machine of some sort or a processing machine of some sort. So, but the funds can be used to pay for a table, a tent, a banner for a farmer's market specifically. So a lot of folks use the funds to basically set themselves up for a farmer's market booth.
Okay, I think I get that. And in the case of a donut, it could help, it couldn't pay for the machine, but it could help pay for the cost of the other materials that go into the donut, for example.
Yes, that's considered ingredients. Yes.
Okay. Can you'd mentioned that you could sell meat into packaged meat. What is those costs that you're covering where it wouldn't cover the freezer as the equipment part?
So it doesn't cover the freezer itself. It can cover the cost for the utility, so the energy that is used to keep the freezer running. It can pay for the packaging itself, you know, the plastic, what's the machine called that sucks the air out of a bag? That thing.
Vacuum wrap.
Vacuum, yeah, vacuum wrap. It can pay for that because that's considered supplies, not equipment. When you think equipment, think of anything that's like a big piece of fixed equipment that costs in the thousands, or a piece of processing equipment like a sausage link maker.
Okay.
Those are ineligible, but small pieces of supplies, vacuum sealer, a printer for label making, stuff like that is all
Okay.
eligible. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's take a couple questions here in the chat box that have been submitted. This one is from Thomas. He says he's a sandwich producer and would like to know how he can purchase items from producers. So I think what he means here is how can he produce or I'm sorry, how can he purchase wheat to turn into flour to then make into the bread for his sandwiches?
Mm-hmm. So I will say that you have to produce at least 50% of the raw commodity that will be used for the project in order to be eligible. So if you're not the producer of the wheat, you're not eligible. If you produce 50% of the wheat and you want to purchase additional wheat, then you could just do that through purchasing it at, a store, or a buddy that you know that does it as well.
Quick
Okay.
question.
Oh, go ahead.
So we own a small organic blueberry farm, and we're processing, and we do an organic garden, but we would like to expand that as well as add some fruit trees that would produce additional fruit so that we could sell more than just the blueberries. Can it be multifaceted like that? Would planting more trees count? Would adding more to the garden and having somebody work the garden count?
So purchasing additional trees is ineligible because it falls outside of the value added activity timeline. Purchasing additional raw commodities such as the picked apples or the picked blueberries, that's eligible. Having someone to man the farm, the garden, that's also eligible. You can you can pay for the labor of that employee through the grant.
Okay.
Along those same lines, if you're just adding new blueberry plants to expand your organic production, is that eligible? Like a different variety?
No, unfortunately, you can't purchase the plant. I wish that they would allow that, but you can't purchase the plant. You have to purchase the berry after it's been harvested.
So for example, if I was going to make blackberry blueberry jam, but I don't produce the blackberries, purchasing the blackberries could be covered.
Well, it's not the same. So if you wanted to purchase additional blueberries, you could. But if you're going to make blackberry blueberry jam fusion, then technically the blackberries would be an ingredient to your value-added product, which is not considered additional raw commodity, but you don't have to purchase additional raw commodity. It's just an option.
Okay, we have a few more questions here in the chat. One of these is about eligibility, Erica, from Scott. Can urban workforce rehabilitation nonprofit programs apply for this grant?
Nonprofit programs are eligible. That would qualify under the agricultural producer group applicant type. It needs to be a formal membership organization that represents agricultural producers, and more than 50% of the membership has to qualify as an independent producer. So the person that actually grows the commodity.
Okay. Another question here from Jade. Could the cost of upgrading to raised beds to develop or to create organic growing, would that be eligible? Maybe that activity, would that be an eligible activity to maybe convert or transition to organic and put in raised
So
beds?
converting, paying for raised beds is not a part of the processing or marketing of the value-added product. It falls outside of the timeline. It falls in line with purchasing the additional blueberry bushes. So no, unfortunately, the purchasing of raised beds would be pre-value-added activity and therefore fall outside of the grant scope. But when it comes to getting organic, certified organic, you can pay, the grant can pay for some activities related to getting organic certified. It just depends on what they are. So more specific questions, if you have them, feel free to email me and I can look them up and we can figure it out.
Erica, can you also put your contact information in the chat box? People missed that on the presentation, and there was a question about that.
Yeah,
yes.
It's not didn't show up on this. Like I can't see the slide.
Was there a follow-up question to what Erica just mentioned?
Yes. Is that, can you certify your kitchen to be to produce things like blueberry jam, blueberry syrup? So is certifying your kitchen qualify?
Yes.
Okay.
That's part of the processing activities. That would, I mean, you need that certification in order to process. So yes. I'm entering my info. There we go.
Okay. And then we have quite a few more questions here in the chat box. Let me see here. So can the grant be used to purchase this is from Joey. Can the grant be used to purchase a distiller and packaging to turn fresh lavender into essential oil for products like lip balm, soaps, and other cosmetics?
So likely no, because a distiller would be considered a piece of equipment, processing equipment at the very least, and processing equipment is not eligible for the program. But packaging for your balms, soaps, anything like that, that's all eligible. Additional ingredients that you want to infuse with the lavender, also eligible. But the distiller is not eligible.
So a follow-up to that, Erica, there was also a clarification submitted in the chat in the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition's Farmer's Guide. There was the mention of the difference between fixed equipment and I don't know if that was variable equipment or what that would be, but or maybe it's more something like construction or permanent equipment. And so the question is there no possibility, excuse me, to buy equipment with the grant funds, or can you explain that, what those terms mean?
So fixed equipment it's something that's bolted into the ground, or there is a definition of fixed equipment that I don't have readily available, but the regulations state that fixed equipment and processing equipment are both ineligible. if, let's see. Yeah, so you can't purchase, lease, purchase, or install fixed equipment, including processing equipment. Fixed equipment has a definition, and like I said, I don't have it readily available, but there's something to do with the depreciation of that equipment. Some pieces of equipment that people consider equipment that would be eligible is like tabletop equipment, such as mixers or little ovens that sit on the tabletop. A small refrigerator that holds drinks, that could also be considered a piece of equipment that's eligible. It's just the big processing equipment that is necessary in order to create the value added product isn't eligible, which is very unfortunate. But it's been that way since, this grant has been available. It has a lot to do with the responsibility the government has on that equipment. If you were to ever want to sell that equipment, you would need to pay the government back. Even though it's a grant, you still need to pay the government back. And so to avoid that whole legal requirement, they just say no equipment.
All right, another question about equipment actually in here. This is from David. Says we have an organic farm and we want to expand our processing. Well, this is actually related a little bit more to construction, but can we use the grant to expand the new processing building?
What do you mean expand? If it's construction, no. Yeah, it just depends on what you mean by expand, but likely if it's construction or if you need to I think you're unmuted. What do you mean by expand?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
So we have an organic farm and a processing building on the side of it.
Mm-hmm.
If we enlarge that building for our larger processing of all of our organic materials and everything that we grow there, which we turn into other products besides what we grow, is that possible to use in the grant?
What would you do to expand it? Would it be construction?
Yes.
No, unfortunately not.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, that's the number one question I get. I wish I could say yes, but
So,
construction and equipment are just a no-go.
so how does a small organic farmer get around how do you come up with how do we go about enlarging our processing and getting the money to do that? You know what I'm saying? From a federal government perspective in a grant.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be honest with you. There aren't a lot of grants offered through the federal government that will go directly to business owners or farmers. And then even further, there aren't a lot of grants in general that will pay for construction of that type. Pretty they're pretty rare and they're pretty competitive if they are available. But what I recommend is starting at your state agencies, your nonprofit agencies, because the typical flow of grant dollars goes from federal to state or local government and nonprofits. And from there, business owners, farmers and ranchers can reach out and compete for those dollars through their local government agencies. The only agency that I know of that does grant dollars for construction of this type is EDA, the Economic Development Administration, but they do not grant dollars to business owners. It's only local and state government agencies. So that's why I recommend just go ahead.
Let me just clarify a few things so that it's in my brain, so the way I understood what you're saying. So anything related to processing that is not related to an expansion of a building or any building costs or fixed equipment, labeling, paid employees that we have, year-round employees, we can use that for the grant. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Thank you.
Yep. No problem.
But
David, I
I'm
put my contact information in the chat box there. I'm Amy Gilroy with the Oregon Department of Agriculture, so
I have it.
we can chat more about some of the state-funded grant programs and what types of construction those might cover for different purposes, because we do
I
have,
would appreciate it. Thank you.
we do have one available. There was a question in here about, I want to make sure we get to all of the chat box because there's quite a bit of questions. There was one about paying fees. So this one's about having your product at a farmer's market, Erica. And the question is whether or not the fees the vendor fees possibly at a farmer's market would be something that the grant could cover the expense of.
Yes. Yep. Can pay it monthly or annually.
Okay, and then there are some questions about the match. Let's see. Are farm direct value added products eligible for the 50% match when they're made in a kitchen that isn't certified, that's not certified, made in
Yes.
a home kitchen or basically not a commercial kitchen?
Yeah, no, it doesn't need to be certified in order to be an eligible value-added product. I mean, for some things, like some products that are regulated by the state, like meat, obviously you need to have certifications already in place. You can't just butcher your animals in your backyard and then sell them to someone off the street, and then it needs to go through some certification process. But for just like organic vegetables that you have in your garden that don't need to go through that stringent certification process, if you process them in your home, that's totally fine. You can do that.
Another question about organic or transitioning to organic, Erica. There's a question about, you mentioned this earlier too, that some of the cost of converting from conventional to organic would be covered, but it mostly along the lines of certification costs.
Yeah.
Can you clarify?
Yeah, some things
what types
qualify, but not all things qualify. Like, you always have to think in the scope of how does this relate to my specific value added product. So if you have one variety of produce that you're using for your value added product, but you want to certify your whole farm as organic, there's a little bit of a gray area because you're not using the funds specifically for that one value added product. You're using it for the general farm. And so in some cases, it could pay for just the license. In some cases, it may pay for the soil testing. But I would again need to know more specifics. And if you would please just call me or email me, I would love to have a discussion offline about the specifics on that one.
Okay, great. A question about using the funding to pay the producer themselves for the fresh product. So would purchasing the product would actually paying themselves for the product that was produced be considered a purchase of raw commodity? Does that make
No,
sense?
that is considered a conflict of interest. You can't pay yourself with the grant funds. You can contribute your product as in-kind raw commodity. So that's one way to, you know, you wouldn't be paying yourself for your own raw commodity. You have to contribute and donate that to the product to the project as your in-kind match, or purchase additional raw commodity from a third party.
Along the same lines, because it sounds somewhat like a labor question as well. There's a question in here about whether someone could pay them. Let's see. Yeah, can they pay them? Can they pay employees of the farm? So maybe
Yes.
talking about the labor cost, maybe just explaining the labor costs a little bit more, like what those allowable labor activities
Yeah.
are, would be helpful.
Well, it depends on the project, but typical labor costs, yes, to answer your question, yes, you can use the grant funds to pay employees to process and market the value-added product. You can also include in-kind employee labor, or which would be donated time by employees, which is rare. Most employees want to get paid, or you can you can donate your in kind up to 25% of the total project cost. So in kind for employees, there's no limit, but there's 25% of the total project cost for your in kind portion as an owner. Labor costs can be used for processing the product, whatever that looks like, cleaning, smashing, I don't know. There's a bunch of different options, but can be used for the processing. The marketing, which could include like a farm stand operator or a transportation person. And transportation gets a little hazy as well, because you can't pay for the transportation from the farm to a processing facility, but you can pay for the transportation from the farm to the purchaser, like a grocery store. Let's think, what other types of labor? You could pay for somebody to develop an online presence, like a website, or a marketing campaign, or somebody to design a label, a new label for your farm or your product. So those are just some ideas that I've dealt with in the past that I can include in that labor examples.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A couple questions about supplies. Would it cover costs such as jars, I guess ingredients too, jars and sugar? So maybe for a project like a jam
Yes.
or something.
Yes, it definitely can pay for jars, lids, boxes. It can pay for sugar as an ingredient. It can pay for all that. Yes.
Okay, and then another question about kind of along the lines of construction, but this is about not new construction, but a repair or an upgrade to achieve certification. So this would be getting your kitchen certified, so that you could produce more value-added products. Can you talk about repairs or upgrades that would be allowable?
Well, if it's construction of any type, it's not eligible. So if it's a repairs to, the floors or the roof or something like that, it's ineligible because, planning, repairing, rehabilitation, or construction is ineligible, unfortunately.
Okay. All right, a couple more questions and then I'll open up the line, or the lines are open now, so you can also ask a question verbally as well. Question about match. This is from Kathy, and she joined late, so this may be just some of what you already mentioned in your presentation. So how would the match work? I mean, when they submit their application with the 2 levels of match, they would prefer to get the COVID funds, of course, with the lower match, but would accept the higher match as an alternative if they had to. So do you want to talk about the priority for the COVID-19 lower match process and how that will be determined?
Yes, I'm really glad that you asked that question because so everyone's automatically going to be in the competition for the COVID funds. And when you submit your application, whether you submit it with the 10% or the 50%, we're still going to score it all the same. If you are awarded COVID funds and you submit your application with a 50% match, we're going to come back and ask you to provide a new budget. Vice versa, if you submit your application with that 10% and you are not awarded COVID funds, we'll ask you to submit your budget with the 50% match. So I would say if you want to be super proactive, develop 2 different budgets with the 50% and the 10% available so that you have it ready to go. But if you just want to wait until you know for sure whether you have to do that or you don't, that's fine. You know, do what you need to do to make sure that you have the most competitive application. But like I said, it's like we're going to look at them all the same in the beginning and score them all the same, regardless of whether or not you submit your app with 50% or 10%.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Clarify what submitting means. Like, do you just prove that that money is in a bank account?
Yes. So when by May 4th for the paper application deadline, you need to have submitted your full application with all of your appendices. And a part of the appendices is showing proof of your match. So whether that's cash or in kind. With cash match, you need to provide your bank statements showing that you have a certain amount of funds in your bank account readily available, but you also fill out a budget section earlier in the toolkit, and that'll show us, you know, whether or not you have the capacity for the 50 or the capacity for the 10. So by May 4th is the deadline.
How do you show your in-kind match? If you were going to go that route.
So it's basically a certification, a self-certification. It's an appendix. It's you state how much you're going to contribute to the project in labor in kind and in raw commodity in kind, and you value both based on a reputable, typical for the market study, essentially. So a lot of folks reference USDA values for example, beef or produce. So they'll take a valuation that is not just something that they pulled out of their back pocket, and they will include that as a proof of the value of their raw commodity. Similarly, for labor, you'll take a typical for the market type salary for that job. And a lot of folks in the past have used the federal GS scale, which is the general schedule scale, which is what we get paid, to value employee salary. But you don't have to use that. There are lots of different types of valuations out there for jobs and raw commodity types. So it's up to you to make that determination on what you're going to value your products at.
All right, well, we are at time, and I want to be respectful of the time everyone's taken to join the webinar. If you do still have a question for Erica, I'm going to give you a minute to look back through the chat and jot her email down, as well as
I'll just put it.
Or you want to restate it there?
Yeah, I'll restate it.
And please, I think please feel free to reach out to her directly about specific questions about your application or getting a DUNS number or getting set up in SAM. Of course, those are things you're going to want to start doing pretty soon if you do intend to apply. But please do feel free to reach out to Erica. And then if you do need a recording of this, I'm going to go ahead and put my email back in the chat here. And if you'd like me to send you the recording, there's my email there, agilroy@oda.state.orus. And we'll get you the recording probably sometime mid next week. All right. Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Amy, could we get your phone number?
Oh, sure.
I think there was a question there for me. I'm still on the line if you want to ask.
I just dropped in my Roberta. I just dropped in my phone number.
I saw
there.
it.
Did you get it? Okay.
Yep, I did, because I came in late because I was having technical difficulties, so I could never see the screens. And so
yeah, well, just give me a call or send me an
okay.
email and I'll help you however I can.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So
Perfect.
I don't know if someone else had a question, but this is Pamela. I live in Corrales. I have a blueberry farm, and I can't wrap my head around the difference between the COVID grant funds versus the other. And do you apply for those differently, or do they cover different things, or is it just a different pot of money?
Yeah, it's really simply a separate pot of money, and there is no specific, you don't need to apply specifically for the COVID funds. You are automatically going to be competing for COVID funds. You don't need to show even that you need the funds due to COVID related hardships. So it's just apply and you're going to be entered in to compete for them. The scoring criteria is where you're going to want to focus on the most, because you want to focus on the whole application, because if it's incomplete in other sections other than the scoring criteria, then it won't be eligible. But to score high points will ensure that you get selected for the COVID funds. So that's how they have determined they're going to do it.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, well, I don't know if there are any other questions. There's just two people left, so. All right. Well, thank you, Amy.
All right. It looks like people are logging off.
Bye. Thanks,
you. Pamela.
Bye. All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye.